Welcome. You are listening to the Alpha Beta Chronicles, presented by the Queer Hermit. Stories of loyalty, strength, and the bond between Alpha and Beta. Settle in and enjoy your time with Dad. The trail begins. Boston's docks had been Robert Anderson's world for over 20 years. The air always smelled of salt, sweat, and tar, the perfume of labor. He'd hauled crates, tied off ropes, and loaded ships bound for every corner of the world, but Robert had never left the city himself. He didn't stay because he couldn't leave. He stayed because he wasn't ready. Robert didn't move through life like most men. He didn't leap before he looked, didn't drift on whims, and never gambled on luck. He was a preparer, a man who thought 3 steps ahead. Everything he did was done with purpose. By the time Robert decided to leave Boston, the decision had been made years earlier, quietly, in his own mind. He had watched the westward expansion take men like him, strong-backed, hard-handed, willing to work, and turn them into landowners, trappers, and traders. He had studied maps, listened to travelers and merchants at the docks, and even practiced the skills he would need long before he took a single step away from the ocean. On his evenings after 10 hours of labor, he didn't drink away his pay like the others. He learned. He learned to track small game in the woods outside the city. He learned to skin, to tan, to cure. He learned how to live off the land, not because he had to, but because one day he would. By 39, his preparations were complete. His siblings, whom he'd raised since his parents died, were grown and living their own lives. His debts were cleared. He had money saved in a leather pouch, tools packed carefully in his worn satchel, and a horse purchased months before his departure. Robert left nothing to chance. He didn't simply walk away from the life he knew. He executed a plan he had built for years. Robert's body reflected the life he lived. Broad-shouldered and solid, every inch of him was built by labor, not vanity. His chest and arms were wrapped in thick black hair, now streaked with the first threads of silver. His beard was the same, dark, full, with a touch of gray that gave him the quiet authority of a man who had waited, watched, and endured. He wasn't fat. There wasn't an ounce to spare, but he was powerful in the way that needed no proof. He'd always known his desires. He'd never once touched a woman, nor a man, but he knew exactly what he wanted. Robert didn't need to experiment to understand himself. He had observed, he had listened, and he had decided. He was an alpha, and he would recognize his beta when the time came. In Robert's mind, that wasn't a question. It was an eventuality. He already knew how he would treat him, firm, protective, patient, and unshakably loyal. His beta wouldn't be a conquest. He would be a responsibility, a choice. A man who would thrive under Robert's steadiness, the way a young tree thrives against the wind, has a strong trunk to lean against. When he finally stepped onto the westbound trail, Robert didn't leave anything behind by accident. His savings, his skills, his horse, his traps, his knives, all in perfect order. He had enough dried provisions to reach the next settlement, and the knowledge to feed himself after that. The world ahead was untamed, but Robert wasn't stepping into it unprepared. He was ready. Nights by the campfire were quiet, but his thoughts were not. The wilderness didn't frighten him. He felt at home in it. The silence gave him space to consider the one thing missing from his plan, the part of his life that couldn't be packed in a satchel or mapped on a route. Somewhere on this trail, maybe a week from now, maybe a year, his beta was waiting. He could almost feel him in the distance, like a change in the wind he couldn't see yet, but would know when it touched his skin. Because a true alpha always knows. And so, with the Atlantic fading behind him and the endless horizon stretching west, Robert Anderson began the journey he had spent a lifetime preparing for, toward land, freedom, and the man who would one day take his rightful place at his side. He packed what little he owned, including the long coat he'd worn every winter for the last decade, and the skinning tools passed down from his grandfather. He'd taught himself how to trap, tan, and trade, skills no man had time to learn while holding down the dock job. But Robert always made time. He wasn't going west to survive. He was going to live. There was a difference. The wagon he hitched a ride with took him as far as Buffalo. After that, it was horse and foot, dirt trail, and hard nights. He hunted along the way, small game, enough to sell and trade. Pelts kept him fed, and barter kept him moving. The wilderness didn't scare him. If anything, it quieted the noise in his head. He didn't need to talk. He didn't need anyone. At least, that's what he told himself. But sometimes, around a fire at night, he'd stare into the flames and feel it, a space next to him that should be filled. Not out of weakness, but out of balance. His body knew it. His mind had known it for years. His hands, hard, calloused, capable, were meant to hold someone smaller, someone warmer. Not to possess, but to protect. Not to control, but to guide. This was the alpha-beta truth Robert lived without ever naming it. That some men were meant to lead and others to follow, but only the right way. The way built on trust, on earned respect. A beta didn't kneel because he was weak. He knelt because he chose to trust. A real alpha didn't demand submission. He invited it and then held it safe. The trail stretched wide before him. Forests gave way to plains. Plains gave way to dust. And all the while, Robert walked, rode, worked, and waited. Somewhere ahead was the next phase of his life. The part he hadn't lived yet. He didn't know his name. He didn't know what he looked like. But Robert knew he was out there. His beta. The one who needed what Robert carried. Not just the strength, but the steadiness. The promise of something sure in a world full of change. He was not in a rush. He never had been. And Alpha knows things worth claiming don't come easy, and they don't come fast. But they do come when the time is right. And so Robert moved west, step by step, hunt by hunt, night by night, until the trail would lead him to the moment he didn't see coming, and to the man who would change everything. Thank you for spending time with Dad in the Alpha Beta Chronicles. If you enjoyed this audio, please like, share, and comment. Come back next week for the next chapter.